Good evening. I'm Charlie Glass, and I'm moderating this panel on a subject I'm completely ignorant of, so I won't be saying very much, and I won't be interfering. We have we were going to have four distinguished speakers, but one of them is stuck in Kosovo, Vaughan Smith, and can't make it. So we have tonight John Keane, who's a British war and conflict artist, who in 1991 was the official British artist during the Gulf War. He's drawn everything from Northern Ireland to Nicaragua, and also British coal industry and mass media drawings. I'm going to ask something about that in a minute. And then we have Roger Tolson, who's the head of the pictures at, I assume the Pictures Archives at... Posters. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Head of pictures.
Oh, sorry, I've got a microphone.
Head of pictures at the. It just says here, head of pictures at the Imperial War Museum, which is a great institution and does have great archives of all kinds of things. And Roger Tooth, who's the picture editor of The Guardian. John Keane, I want to ask you first of all, the subject is of this discussion tonight, in case you don't know, is how has modern technology changed our perception of wars and conflict? Are war artists a thing of the past? But I wanted to ask John Keane, because you were an official war artist, where this concept in the British Armed Forces of having an official war artist at all came from.
Well, I think actually probably Roger is better qualified as a representative to the Imperial War Museum. There is a, I suppose it's really a 20th century tradition, isn't it, of since the First World War, where artists were commissioned. I think, am I right in where initially in a sort of propagandistic respect? Would that be true to say, or?
I think, yes, you could call it propagandistic. It's slightly different. I think it's you've always had artists who followed campaigns, and there'll be endless depictions of the Battle of Waterloo usually from the victor's perspective, from Wellington's standpoint on the top of a hill. And it always makes the battle look very calm and controlled and organised. And actually what becomes very different with the First World War is there's this desperate need for images for the public, and photography, although it's a developing form, isn't able to supply those images. So the idea of sending artists out at the time of the Battle of the Somme was the point when the first artist appointed, Muirhead Bone, was a printmaker and known for his sort of graphic work. So he was sent out just to record and produce images. I mean, they're not great art, but actually they were lapped up by the public. It was a need-to-know sense.
No, but there were war artists for newspapers and magazines in the Crimea and elsewhere, competing with photographers, presumably, although probably they could get their material out more quickly than photographers in those days, because they had problems developing. But when did it become sort of institutionalized?
I think the British government had seen what had been happening in previous wars, and particularly in the First World War, took the view that they wanted to control the media. I've never heard that before, but it was very much they took the view that any reporting that was coming back, whether it be photography or art, they wanted it coming from them rather than from other sources. So certainly I believe that newspaper photographers had struggled to get to the front line, whereas the official photographers would have been in a more privileged position.
And they were all censored?
Yes, there was a censorship process, certainly for the art, and one or two pictures kind of got caught up in that process. But by and large, it seemed to have things came through quite smoothly.
Do you think that in an age of photography for the printed media and also of moving pictures for the internet and television, that there's still a place, and if so, what is the place for the artist?
Well, I think that is an interesting point, and I think the role of the artist as photography and moving pictures and so on advanced, then the artist really began, as with modern art in many respects has begun to move away from just a record, a purely representational record of something seen, and has had to explore new areas. And I think probably the same has applied to great effect, you know, but through many of the war artists, for instance, in the Second World War, for instance, and indeed since then, where you have to. I mean, from my own point of view, I was there in the Gulf War. I knew that there was a lot of journalists. Basically, I was moving around with the hacks. I was part of the accredited press pools. I saw as much or as little as they did. It was quite a controlled situation. However, I felt my role was to, whilst I had observed pretty much what they had, to process that material in a different way, and not for something that was there to meet the needs of tomorrow's newspaper or tonight's newscast or anything like that, but to look on it more reflectively, if you like, over a period of time with hindsight. And I was using a camera when I was there. I was photographing, and I had a video camera as well, and making notes. And the work that I did upon return.
You didn't do any sketching on the spot?
I didn't do any sketching. It's not a way. I do not work in that way. It's not. I want to absorb as much as possible and observe as much as possible. And sitting down and sketching is not really conducive to that. And I find that the photographic medium is a much better sketchbook for the purposes that I want.
Is that normal with war artists?
I mean, I don't think there is any.
These pictures, I think Feliks Topolski tended to do his on site.
Well, he had obviously a huge facility to be able to work very quickly,
yeah.
and that shows in the work displayed, and that, you know, that's a great gift. But people work to a different agenda. Different artists have different points or different areas that they don't want to work in, and no two are alike. And so, and as I said, you know, I don't think you can say what is normal for a war artist, because there's no such thing as a normal war artist.
But at The Guardian, do you ever use illustrations rather than photographs?
Very, very occasionally in the features pages. But I think the idea of kind of using art as in a sort of a long-term project is a really nice one. Because there is, obviously, as soon as the picture's taken, we kind of want to have it back in London. Whereas if you could say, well, actually, why don't you work on this for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then show it to us, would actually be really nice, I suppose. It would kind of slow everything down, especially as this war's gone on such a long time now. These two wars,
the Iraq and
the Iraq
Afghanistan.
War, yeah.
Are there artists, good artists, working in Iraq and Afghanistan now?
So you don't know.
Did you know?
There was.
We commissioned artists for both conflicts. We sent a photographer, Paul Seawright, and conceptual artist, Langlands and Bell, to Afghanistan, which was sort of new, and it partly was us sort of responding to the way that we perceive the war from this country anyway, through television media or through photography, and so we deliberately chose artists who work with those in those formats or were prepared to work in different areas. And so they were there in 2003, and then we also sent filmmaker Steve McQueen to Iraq in the end of 2003. And his is a work in progress. It's just come on display at the museum, and it's a project that's commemorating the lives of British service personnel who've been killed in Iraq, and it's, although the piece is on display, it's an ongoing project that will carry on. So that's sort of very much sort of.
Is it the Imperial War Museum who chooses the war artists?
Well, we choose our war artists.
It's a separate.
But there are other. I come across recently an artist who's been working with the armed forces in Iraq. Nothing to do with us. It's interesting to know about them.
And are they embedded like journalists?
Yes, they would be. Yes, they go out under invitation, and other people obviously sort of find their own way to the front line. We acquired a piece from a painter who was in Sarajevo, and he just went out. He thought it was an interesting place to go and work, he dressed up as a casual tourist and wandered up to the front line, trying to pretend to be an innocent Englishman abroad, just because he thought that was a way of getting there.
And it worked.
It sort of works, yeah.
Now, with the artists that you send or that are going with the forces, where can we see their work? Because I don't see them in the newspapers, for example, as a rule.
The work that we commission or we acquire from our commissions is held in the collections. Actually, quite a bit of it is on display at the moment. And
some of the work that I produced was quite widely publicised in the media, and it caused a bit of a stink, actually. So
oh, why? Tell me.
Oh, one of the paintings, there was a painting that the museum decided, because I produced a lot of work, there's one that they decided to take by way of completion of the commission for the collection. And the imagery involved a Mickey Mouse child's rocking machine that I observed on the front at Kuwait, which appeared, and it was the tabloid press took it up with a vengeance as being anti-American and an insult to our boys and so on. So yes, there was quite a bit of press coverage.
Oh, but no, but I meant in terms of
Disney weren't very happy about it either. No.
But I meant really these pictures being used to illustrate stories rather than the subject of a controversy in and of itself. But I would like actually to see the Guardian and other papers use drawings more.
I don't think it would happen in the news section.
They occasionally crop up as by way of to illustrate an article, a comment piece or something like that. That has happened, but not as a news item. No.
When historically, if any one of you knows, and if Philip Knightley is here, he'll know. When historically did the photographers supersede the artists in terms of popular press? Okay. I wasn't trying to show.
Well, I mean, the Manchester Guardian had adverts on the front page until fairly recently, so not many photographs at all. It must be in the early 20th century, I suppose. Slightly earlier. I don't know. I'm not a historian, even a photographic historian.
And
we published a picture from the Crimea on our centre spread, but that was just because it was being exhibited at the Tate Britain at the time.
And now new media, which is part of this discussion tonight, are war artists going to be a thing of the past as yet? Is internet and other new media seem to be moving forward?
I don't think so. I mean, just spare your blushes. I mean, I remember your Mickey Mouse paintings clear as yesterday, because I put John's name into the archive, and there it came up, and I thought, oh yeah, that's the picture, isn't it? I thought it was. So, you know, it's interesting how painting has a sort of a longevity that perhaps photography doesn't, but perhaps I've just been in photography too long.
Also, artists now use many different media as well. They use new media, so, I mean, they can engage in that way to produce something working, perhaps using the same tools that the media use. But that's what I was saying, it's to a different agenda. It's not
a journalistic agenda.
Exactly. It's to serve some other purpose, some longer-term purpose. And so long as artists continue to be inventive and explore that, then yes, of course there's a role. And it provides a sort of parallel and separate commentary, perhaps, on events which people may be informed about historically and journalistically. But it's the. I mean, I would say it's a difference between sort of an event being recorded prosaically for a piece of journalism and a poet talking about the same event. I mean, they're both using words, but they're serving a different agenda, and it's a different approach.
I think in a kind of a news context, it could look cartoonish as well, almost a comment. And you know, the news pages actually don't. We try not to have comments in. It tends to be, you know, objective reporting rather than anything subjective.
I see.
And I suspect, you know, an artist would immediately put some sort of subjective spin on a scene, possibly. I don't know. Whereas a camera, hopefully, doesn't.
Although it can.
Can.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with a lot of photographers over the years, and two of the best war photographers I've worked with were Philip Jones Griffiths and Don McCullin, who took startling images in Vietnam and elsewhere that were great journalism, but now in their books and exhibitions around the world are also an art form in and of themselves. But when you, as a photo editor, are looking at a picture, you just need something quickly that will illustrate the story that's been written, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, you want in the picture, you want the story, you want impact on the page, all those sort of everyday things, really, don't you? Really, not kind of looking for art. Although, I think as the war goes on, you're just kind of looking for something different as much as possible.
Is it hard to keep the reader's attention?
I'm sure it is, yeah. And the editor's attention, the other editor's attention. The word grim comes up quite often in our office. That's a bit grim, isn't it? Again.
Well, Iraq and Afghanistan are not cheerful subjects as a rule.
Well, that's the trouble.
Although in the American media, they certainly try to take the light side, always looking for the good news in Baghdad. And they really have to look hard. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of fatigue, isn't there, in there now? Are there some great pictures that have come out of Iraq that you can remember offhand? Well, our own guy, Sean Smith, took an amazing set when he was embedded just this summer, and shot video at the same time, which was kind of, hardly believe he did it really, but he did. He's got probably a dozen pictures that are kind of What were they amazing. Of? One was a Humvee it had just been blown up on its top, with people running towards it. There were 6 GIs in there, I think, all dead. In flames. He was there kind of seconds after a bomb, roadside bomb went off outside a house, and the Iraqi soldiers were blown up, and he's kind of recorded that. He's recorded the GIs trying to sort of save this guy's life, with kind of blood on the marble floors and things like that. He has got amazing set of pictures still, and they keep coming up. Yeah. But it's interesting that because he was our guy, we were even more interested in them than the Reuters stuff that comes in every day and the AP stuff that comes in every day. It just added something to the mix for us and for our editors, duty editors. But these are sort of strong images you think that will endure and be remembered. You can't tell. Well, I don't know really. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's just so much coming out of there still, I mean, on a day-to-day basis you might say not that much, but in total, amazing amount has come out. Have you had any desire to go to Baghdad in this conflict?
I was quite glad I did my tour of duty first time round, frankly. I mean, no, I wouldn't. It was, I wouldn't. And, my life has changed. I now have children and there's some other things. But no, in terms of just the sheer hideousness of it, I wouldn't. No.
Have you seen any good art coming out of it?
To be honest, no, not yet. I mean, it doesn't mean there won't be. I mean, because it's something that it's an issue that I want to address as well. But obviously, I'm not going there. But I will have to use other sources, obviously, than direct source. But that's something I do as well. I do paintings from imagery that I have, from a secondary source as well. So, but nonetheless, it's. I mean, as you were saying, there's this sort of kind of fatigue of imagery, which must be pretty hideous. And if you look at some things on the internet, it is pretty hideous. Sort of unpublishable images that would just would be too horrific for sort of daily fare. But I think these issues are really important, and they do need to be addressed. And where there is media fatigue, where images are not deemed suitable for public consumption, I think there is a role where art can address that, because these issues shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, they shouldn't be forgotten what's going on there at all. And I think it is very easy for that to be subsumed into daily normality. And it's quite difficult, obviously, for people to address that day after day after day. But I think so an artist can. I mean, in any medium. I mean, I don't necessarily mean a visual artist, a writer, a playwright, or a filmmaker or something could and should, I think, be addressing that.
Now, you say that your photographer is also shooting video. Where is that shown, on your website or?
Yeah.
Shooting? Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was shown on Channel 4 News as well.
Oh, so he's freelancing a bit.
No, we just sold it to
You saw
Children.
That's good
Trying to get
know.
some cash back.
Oh, okay. To pay for the change of design of the paper.
Something like that. Just pay for everything. I was just going to say that something about the fatigue as well. I mean, I don't know if people might be aware of this probably, but I mean, throughout the summer when this sort of suicide bombs were getting worse and worse, it came to a stage where if 20 people were killed in a bomb, we kind of were interested. It had to be sort of 50 or 60. It was just, it got absolutely crazy and kind of psychologically a bit bizarre, I think. And now it's calmed down a bit. That's gone away a bit, thank goodness. But I mean, there was a bomb, was it Wednesday, I think. I think 12 were killed. Crete, I think. And there's a great picture from that. We didn't use it because 12 isn't enough.
It's a bit cynical.
It is cynical, but that's I'm just
reality.
Reporting really.
No.
Reporting what the the feeling is. And
Yeah.
that doesn't that's not a blip on the radar now on the foreign desk.
Even if it has, I mean, just out of curiosity now.
What if there are a dozen children, possibly?
No, but I mean, if it has some political significance beyond the bomb itself.
Possibly.
Then,
If there'd been a news event, a political news event that day, that you could then peg the picture to, it
like
might
Tony
get in the
Blair's
paper.
visit or some foolish thing.
Yeah.
But what if the image is extremely strong and compelling?
It could.
It still has
it could fight its way.
You could fight for it.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to open it up for questions from all of you. If anyone is interested to know any more about this, please feel free to ask something or anything. Anybody want to kick off? Hi, Jack, from you. Ernie, nice to see you.
Yeah, I'll pick up.
Oh, thanks. Identify yourself.
My name's Jack Lawrence. There was a kind of compassion fatigue that set in the United States during the Vietnam War, when 12 dead in one battle, even though they were American dead, you got less than a paragraph in the newspapers. And as I recall, the same thing happened in Northern Ireland in the 70s. That is, the carnage, the coverage of the carnage in almost any war since the 60s, and the Middle East as well, Charlie would know, reaches a point in a long struggle, whoever it may be, gets less and less attention as the public becomes immune to the violence. And I was only going to suggest it becomes necessary for us as journalists to find new ways of getting the message across that, the same old message. Someone sent me an email recently saying every generation in the United States has to relearn the lessons of war. The political leaders, the military, the rest of them. And to that end, I would recommend David Halberstam's new book, The Coldest Winter, which is about the Korean War, and how much those political leaders and military leaders failed in their generation to learn the lessons of war.
Thanks very
I
much.
guess it's not a question.
No, it's not, but it's a good statement, though. Any questions? Yes, Dan Topolski. Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Dan Topolski. It's my father's drawings which are all around here and upstairs and everywhere. I'm quite curious really to kind of explore this a little bit. He was doing this stuff in the 40s, 39, 40, 41, except for the one there on the left above your head there, which is a cartoon from the 30s. But his work, he was on every front during the war. He was an officer in the Polish army, so he was able to get, as a war artist with the Allies, he was able to get to every front, everywhere. And I don't think there was anything like the restrictions that we have now, that everybody's embedded, they're all sort of under a lot of control. So he had this freedom to get everywhere, and the immediacy of the drawings, where he was actually being the photographer. The photographs were taking much longer to get back home. And he was actually sending these drawings back much faster. So they were in Picture Press, they were in the Illustrated London News, they were in the News Chronicle. And they were there. That was how British people were seeing the war, was through those drawings. And because of that immediacy, which was like photography in its kind of immediate impact, that kind of had a real resonance. And he then went on to, later on, to be there in India at the time of independence, in Vietnam, in Laos, China, and carried on, because he was inspired by this kind of bearing witness business. Now, I just wonder whether we are in a position now where that kind of immediacy as an artist, that kind of immediacy doesn't really work anymore, although he was on every front line and just seeing it all. And whether photography has taken over, or whether the bloggers from the front line, the soldiers who are sending their stuff back, those guys are really kind of giving you the real kind of frontline stuff. And you know, it's coming through on templates, it's coming through on, you know, all sorts of other ways. So is it that this kind of stuff is now defunct, and the war artist goes out there with an easel, steps back a long way, and does a kind of an impression of war, and that's now the role of the war artist, rather than actually hitting it as it happens?
I'm going to ask you to jump in here.
I was going to say, yes, I think it, to a certain extent it has. I think what Roger is saying is true in the sense that photography is so easy, the transmission of images is so easy and so quick that we are saturated with them. And I just, although there's something very personal about these drawings, and consequently, you know, engaging, and they tell a different sort of story, they're competing against this mass volume, and as Roger has said, that there doesn't seem to be a place for them in the sort of print medium anymore. Whereas certainly the artists we're commissioning or thinking about are ones who we think will engage with the subject, absorb it, and then take that step back, much as John described doing. But their work will be finished back in the studio rather than made on the ground. But it's not always been the case. We sent Linda Kitson to the Falklands War, and she was working in a very similar style. And the thinking there was that we wanted somebody who could respond immediately and quickly, and that would be, you know, this is before digital photography, so it was a way of working. But I think it unlikely we would send somebody or appoint somebody working in that style again.
So this is now historical record, it's kind of, it's something that's past.
Yes, I think so. I mean, who can say? It might say I might be proved wrong next week, but as far as I can tell, in terms of our thinking and the way we're looking, the sort of commissions we're looking at, I think this will, yes, I can't imagine this sort of scale. But what's interesting, sorry, I've gone too long, but in terms of the Second World War, is you have hundreds, I think, forget how many, about 300 artists who are either commissioned or employed, or whose work is being bought by the British government. So you're bound to have a panorama. Virtually every British artist who was, you know, we recall from that period, was employed or work ended up being purchased by the government. So they're bound to have a huge range, you know, from your father's work to Henry Moore, to John Piper, to Stanley Spencer, and you know, the artistic practice, even if they're still working with pencils and paints, is still very broad, and that's represented in the collections. Whereas now we're just picking one artist out of the ocean, as it were. It's out of a you know, a huge crowd of potential we could select from. So there's a different set of criteria maybe we're applying.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, and whether this is something that is not. I tend to agree. I mean, I think it's.
You don't have to.
No, I don't know. It's true. I think it's difficult to imagine this kind of work being done today. I mean, apart from anything else, it's. I would have thought just logistically it'd be incredibly difficult in the.
Well, I should think setting up an easel in Baghdad.
Exactly. I mean, it
might draw a bit of attention.
Even someone running in and taking a photograph and running away.
Shaw was being targeted the whole time by snipers.
Yeah.
As soon as you leave a Humvee, you're a target, I think.
Maybe an easel's the answer.
Can I just say, I mean, we've got John's film in our archive, in our film archive, so we still have that record of what was interesting him at the time, and it's fascinating to go and see the film and then come back and see the paintings, because the components of the paintings, the scenes, the elements of it are, are recorded in the video, moving into a particular room or a particular site or a particular scene on Kuwait Beach. It's there in the video, and it is interesting. So I suppose that would be the equivalent of Topolski's work, as it were. Your video shots.
Yes, of a kind of a moving sketchbook. Yeah.
I'm quite interested in whether you think your father was a sort of objective reporter or not, or whether he was being more of an artist than a reporter.
No, reporting. I think that he was his mission was to bear witness. That was what he wanted to do, to just see, to tell the story of what was happening. And in Nuremberg, in Belsen, when he was in Belsen, he wasn't thinking of himself as an artist. He had this incredible knack of draftsmanship, a fantastic talent, which he was kind of slightly disparaging about. I mean, he saw it as a means to an end, and he wanted to be he wanted to paint. So he produced this huge 600-foot-long painting called Memoir of the Century, which is the kind of painting which tells the story of the century. But he used the drawings as raw material for that. So he was kind of rather dismissive of his own talent for drawing. So it wasn't the art, it was because he was able to tell the story. That's what he was doing. He was out there doing that story. It's interesting now that even because we went from war analyst to photography to television covering it. Now television is using the bloggers. It's using the guys, the soldiers who are out there and showing that stuff. So bit by bit, we're kind of being, the reporting is becoming more and more immediate and more exciting, and without the kind of reflection that an artist perhaps does in the field and where he thinks about how it should be represented. So we're getting different levels of war reporting.
And with that, with all of the material that's available, the public seems less and less interested in the subject matter.
Yeah.
At The Guardian, have you done reader surveys to find out why?
No, we haven't. I think it's just a sort of a hunch, and going back to, I can't remember which war it was now. I think it was the Falklands. Was I there? No, I wasn't there. It must have been the first Gulf War. I was phoned up one day by someone saying, "You're not showing us the truth, you're just holding it all back. You've got all these pictures that you're not showing." I said, "Well, we haven't got any pictures to show you. We're showing you every single picture we've received so far." And I wonder if people just do want to see more of this stuff. I think we've got a very serious readership, and I'm not convinced by our journalistic management that the paper's too grim. I don't accept that, actually. But I'm not the editor or the duty editor.
But is it not the case that actually being able to cover a lot of what is going has been far too dangerous? So that the
our guy would have to work under protection of the Americans or the British. I mean, the Reuters and AP are using Iraqis to take their photographs for them, and you wonder how that they're doing it as well. So yeah, it's it's really difficult to work in Iraq, isn't it? There's no two ways about it. We're trying to get someone into Basra, and the British Army or the MOD just aren't being very helpful.
That's right, they weren't very helpful with me either.
What have they got to cover up, apart from the fact they just sit around playing cards all day in Basra Airport?
They're not in Basra anymore, anyway.
But I mean, perhaps art would be a way of getting it back in the paper. I don't know.
And same with Afghanistan? Or even more so?
It's very restricted, and it's all down to the MOD and whatever.
But in terms of reader interest in the subject?
I just don't know.
Okay.
I mean, my hunch is our readers want as much as we can give them. But I'm in a minority, obviously, at the
Perhaps
office.
the advertising department doesn't feel the same.
Oh, no, we don't listen to them.
No, okay. That's what
I hope we don't. No, I'm fairly certain we don't listen to them. No, it's a general hunch about how bright or interesting or approachable a newspaper looks, and that's what it's about. Really, we do have to try and keep our circulation.
Jack Lawrence, who's a very well-known respected American television journalist with CBS in Vietnam and with ABC in the Middle East and elsewhere, made a point that every American generation seems to have to relearn all the lessons of war. And luckily for them, every American president gives them another war so they can learn it all again. But it makes one wonder what impact all of this has, whether it's my writing, your drawing, the photographs that you publish. They still keep dragging us off to colonial wars, and the public, whether they like it or not, it happens. And I assume that the public, particularly when it doesn't like it, disengages because it's not being listened to anyway.
Yeah, that could be a point. Yeah, I think that could be.
So what's the point of what we do? Is what I'm asking.
I think the thing is, that's probably true, isn't it? But I mean, if you've still got innocent people being blown up every day of the week, it should be reported, however grim it is. I think, but you know, the opinion in the office is you can't have a grim mix every day of the week, I suppose.
Do you think that's true with your competing newspapers as well?
Yeah.
Same sort of thing.
We're probably as serious as anybody gets. I mean, one of the problems is not having anybody in Iraq. I mean, Sean, the photographer, went in, and one reason why he went was because we didn't have a reporter there. And at least we had someone there who was kind of reporting.
And what about in other wars in which American British forces are not engaged, but in wars that are going on in Africa now, Darfur, the Eastern Congo, and so forth? Is there enough space given in your paper to either the visual images or to the words?
I think we've been covering Darfur fairly adequately. I mean, it's not centre stage for us, is it really? I mean, it comes and goes, isn't it? All those wars come and go. It's not quite as constant. Images from there are difficult to come by as well. But I think we've been doing fairly reasonably well on that.
Do artists go off to these other wars, non-British wars?
We do, yes, and some of the work comes back to us. Right? So, I mean, John's just come back from.
Well, it was Angola last year, but that's now post-conflict. But I did a project in the Middle East, in West Bank and Gaza, 5 years ago.
What was that?
Well, that was at the invitation of Christian Aid. They just took me out there just again, to observe and absorb, and I produced a whole exhibition of paintings about that.
What, other Palestinians living under occupation?
Yeah.
I'd like to see that. Where was that shown?
Well, it was shown originally in London at what was then the London Institute Gallery in Davis Street, and then it toured to Belfast, Derby, and one other venue, which I forget.
Will it be on your website?
Yeah.
We can put it on your site now.
Currently under construction, literally today. But it's like the gallery I show with the Flowers East website, flowerseast.com.
Flowerseast.com, okay.
You can see some of John's paintings on display at the moment at the War Museum.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And you can watch a video of me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. Any other questions from the audience? I'll just take one from Mira Stout, who does know something about Korea. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say something about Ronald Searle, who was in Japanese prisoner of war camps in the war. And when VJ Day happened, the anniversary, I think it was last year, the TV news showed his drawings of done inside the camp. They showed them in the way that you would have shown still photographs or any other sort of document. Photographic. I can't remember the name, but in Japan. Yes. He was in, you maybe know this, he was in his early 20s.
Where was it?
Changi, yeah. And they showed these images, maybe because there were no others, but actually they were very important because he was actually one of those prisoners. And so his view wasn't just of an observer on the outside, it was completely from the inside. And he, also another thing about drawing itself there was that the other prisoners shared in the experience of these drawings, they would actually hide them. He had to hide his drawings. He had to, you know, look around, find materials. He sort of smuggled things, and he also used it as they used to draw the food that they would love to eat. In other words, it was a very communal experience of these drawings, and I think that is the central difference between photographs and drawings in a place. It's that you can't see what photograph somebody's taken; they just take it away with them. But with a drawing, it's a shared thing, and in the case of those ones, it was a very shared thing, and also very sort of healing, perhaps, or it was something for people to think about, and it had many different purposes.
Any question here? We have to wait for the microphone, unfortunately, so I just want to say.
It wasn't a question, it was more, funnily enough.
If you could identify yourself. If you could identify yourself first.
My name's Mr. Toland, and I wanted to ask more about, you know, how people felt about the cartoonist's vision of war, because sometimes, I mean, I can look in a newspaper at various photographs that one sees so many similar, but to see a powerful political artist's vision of something makes a huge impact, and nobody sort of really mentioned someone drawing at a distance that hasn't been embedded or actually been on the scene, but just has a take on it.
Okay.
We certainly collect them, and we have a particularly strong collection from the Falklands, and I think partly because there was this, and because my predecessor was actively collecting, but I think they are, I would agree with you, they're extremely potent. I still look at them and think of them. Some of us, from my point of view, I think they're stronger images perhaps than some of the art that came out of the Falklands. Things like They Died to Save Her Face and Spray, which just caught a particular mood. I'm not, it wasn't national, but it was, there was some equally, pro-British involvement in it. But it was, I would agree, I think they are an extraordinary record of those times. At the moment, we sort of lack the resource to follow things up. And I occasionally see something like a Steve Bell cartoon in The Guardian, and I think, should do something about that. And at some point, maybe we'll have to start working to try and bring them into our collection. But it's, yes, I think I would agree. So.
Yes, we have to wait for the microphone, but please. No, the lady, you can go next time.
Hello, hi, my name's Nesta. I'm actually an artist and a storyboard artist, and I illustrate film and film festivals and functions and talks and things like that. And my question to you is that newspapers here are very centred on reading, except for something like The Spectator, which is a magazine which focuses very much on cartoons and illustrations, because they feel probably that one needs to cater for not only the reader but also the person who is more visually inspired by things. And don't you think there's a danger that newspapers have in running down the line on having photographs taken and sort of sensationalising on the photograph to put a story together or to grab someone's attention, as opposed to allowing sort of just access to a slightly different type of audience for the paper who might actually respond more to a cartoon or a drawing, because some people listen to words and some people look at pictures and some people do different things. And I wanted to ask you about that, and also where you think the papers are going to go sort of 20 years from now, how quickly the photographs are going to be taken.
Well, the paper will probably be online in 20 years from now, I suspect, so it might not be printed, which would be a shame, but that's what seems to be the perceived wisdom. I think you're probably quite right, but the thing about newspapers, they're incredibly old-fashioned things, and we're all kind of old-fashioned old guys working on them, I suppose, and we think, oh, it's front page, it needs a photograph on it, it's page 4, it needs a photograph. we probably need to shake ourselves out of that. I was just saying earlier on, there's an interesting exhibition at the Hayward, opened last week, Painted from Life. And it's an exhibition of paintings done mostly from, or a lot of them from news pictures. And we've kind of, we got involved with that. We're invited to send 3 artists news pictures, and they're coming up with paintings from those news pictures. And I kind of thought it was really, really interesting. But I mean, I've been there 20 years now, and so I'm a bit like most people in this room. If you can do something different, it's like, I didn't say that, did I? So I was kind of quite excited about this idea. So I mean, perhaps we do more of that. I don't know. But I just think when the paper was redesigned 2 or 3 years ago, it was designed around photographs. Still, it wasn't designed around illustrations in the main section. The second section uses lots of illustration now, I think. And one of the problems is speed, isn't it? Because you can get a photograph within 10 minutes or 30 seconds, but you've got to wake up very early in the morning to get an illustration done in time to go to press at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. So that could be a problem in the news section. But I mean, it could be they were going around in circles.
There's a curious use of photographs in the papers and video of the same material on the televisions, I guess about 10 days ago. The video of Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed walking in and out of a lift.
Yeah.
And I remember watching and I thought, well, this is just 2 people walking in and out of a lift. It doesn't actually add anything to the sum of human knowledge, and yet it was on the front page of every newspaper in the country.
I went to the kind of news conference the next morning in the office, and everybody was saying, oh yeah, those pictures are amazing, because that was her last walk and things like that. And these are people working on a serious broadsheet. I mean, I was kind of, I quite liked the picture we used. She was looking at the camera, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But
news value, actually, real news value, nil.
Yeah, but the room full of journalists was split between people saying this is intrusive, this is 10 years ago, it was a sad death, and the other half saying I want to read everything about Diana still.
Still.
Yeah. And these are serious people saying this.
I was intrigued by the fact that these images were just coming to light rather than...
Yes, they haven't been seen before.
Yeah,
I think that was part of it, because there's the obsession with the death of Diana, and these were images that had not been aired before.
Right.
I think probably that.
I know the opening salvo in an inquest, but actually no relevance to the inquest at all.
None at all. I mean, I'm very cynical about the whole event. So even, I have to say, even I was mildly captivated by this.
Maybe a minority of one.
I'm sorry to admit.
It's on page 7 in our paper, I think. So.
Well, nice. Respect. Max Mulhern, just here. And then I will come to you next. I apologize.
Hi, Max. I just wanted to...
Max Mulhern is a well-known American artist.
I just want to know how you thought... I'd like to introduce the idea of a second front line, that's to say, the cinema. It's a huge, huge industry in America making films about wars. And it seems like, I mean, I just would like to have your views on it in terms of what is the best way to talk about a war visually. Because I find that if you just look at Steven Spielberg's Searching for Private Ryan, the opening sequences, I mean, what more do you have to know about war after seeing that? That's an image that keeps coming back. If you look at Full Metal Jacket, the whole boot camp scenario, preparing for war. Is it perhaps better to talk about war in fictional terms instead of trying to grasp something that's on the ground that is always ends up coming short of the mark?
Who shall I pass that to? Probably the Imperial War Museum. Does the War Museum collect fiction and films?
We collect films. We don't collect sort of fictional films in the sense that how you describe Saving Private Ryan, for instance. I agree. I think it's quite interesting in terms of engaging a larger audience. Yeah, I would agree hands down with the number of people who go and see a Spielberg movie. We're never going to get that audience to come and see our latest war commission. We'd love it, but it's just not going to happen. So you are engaging a different audience. what we would say is that still that the art we're commissioning still has value, and it's still working in a particular in its own particular way, is addressing issues and asking questions about what it's seen and the conflicts it's recording and responding in a different sort of way. Maybe not so engaging or so accessible, but still it has a different feel to it. The piece we have by Steve McQueen at the moment is a very private, intimate piece, and works at a completely different level than going to see the Dot Cinema. So they're just doing different things and engaging in a different way. Sorry, I'm not sure if I've quite answered your question.
Well, you don't have to.
I think as a British audience would be very unhappy about getting their truths through an American studio system. Well, that's how I'd feel about it.
No, but they do.
Well, perhaps they shouldn't.
This gentleman here has had his hand up so long.
I do take the point about falling short, though. I do take the point about falling short, imagery-wise. I think we do. I think.
What's the role of how much more powerful fictional representation can be?
But that feels like cheating to me. You see.
Well, no.
You're just filling in the back.
Well, presumably the world has enough space for both.
Yeah, well, sure, but I don't think.
But it's funny how literature teaches it's fiction, but it can still teach us all the great lessons. So,
but it should be.
I was just wondering in terms of what is the best expression and what's the best way to represent a war? It's having people on the front line and bringing back images and words to us, or having someone recreate those front lines, Black Hawk Down or Full Metal Jacket, or even this first the film Paths of Glory.
Yeah. I think it's just got to be labelled, doesn't it? As fiction or faction or.
Factions are good.
Now, finally, could you identify yourself as well, please?
Hi, my name is Tom Young. I'm a painter. And last year I was commissioned privately to go to Lebanon to paint a landscape for a Lebanese family in London. And loved the place, but as soon as I came back, the conflict with Israel started. And I was so horrified by what happened. I thought, as an artist, I've got to kind of respond some way. And my idea was to go back to Beirut, to the parts of the city that had been bombed most heavily, and work with children, perhaps trying to get them to express how they felt and what they experienced. And we sort of worked together, so we kind of collaborated on these pieces, and it was quite a moving experience. But and I was going to ask John, did you ever work with any local people in your process? And what do you think about the idea that the artist maybe could facilitate some kind of relationship with the people on the receiving end of war and actually involve them in the art rather than always standing at a distance?
In response to your question, have I ever worked with people on the ground in places I've visited? The answer generally is no, but where it's been possible, it's been important to me to present the work that I produced, having been somewhere, if possible, back in the place from whence it came. For instance, I did a series about Northern Ireland in sort of late 80s, and that was shown in Belfast. And I wanted to show the Middle East pictures I did in Ramallah, but sadly the British Council wouldn't stump up. The most recent thing I've done was not the most recent, but last year I had a show about based on the Moscow theatre siege in 2002, which is obviously all done from second-hand material, but I had that was shown in Moscow, and a lot of the people who were affected or involved in the siege came to the show, and that it was. I mean, people came up to. They were in tears, and it was quite. I was really moved actually, because they've been treated pretty much with contempt by the authorities, and they were very touched that someone, like myself, who's a sort of completely miles away, nothing to do with the events personally, should address that and go and show that in Moscow. So that, I was very moved that they responded like that. So, but I mean, no, I mean it's where I can, I'll do that. But yeah.
I'm going to take a question. I just want to take this. You got a woman in the back here.
Hello, Brenda Griffiths. I'm a former science editor of BBC News. I'm just curious to know if the Imperial War Museum has been offered material from the forces, because they've all got their own DVDs and video phones and everything. You can get any access to any of it, or they offer it to you?
We have official lines from material, film and photographs that come through the MOD filmmakers and photographers. So that comes in in its millions. So
I was meaning more the soldiers themselves, not official MOD photographers.
No, that's really for us to go and search out. I mean, we're interested. We certainly are, and it's one of the questions we have at the moment is how we gather that material and where we go and look for it. But it's certainly on our agenda. And if people came along and said I was there at such and such, and these are my photographs I took on my mobile phone or whatever, yeah, we'd swap phones and take them. But we're just sort of coming to terms with this. I mean, I guess slightly slowly, I think, but maybe people aren't going to be writing letters home from Basra, but their blogs are going to be there and their emails are around, and how we start to gather that material and sift it.
In a way, it's a new world for you.
It's a new world for us. It's a new way of collecting, and it's sort of quite interesting comparing what the museum did when it was founded in sort of 1917. It put out adverts in the newspapers and was swamped with material. And I guess we're slightly cautious in that there is so much stuff out there. Potentially, we could be swamped and not quite know what to do with it. So there are issues I'm trying to think through at the moment, but it's one of 150 particular issues that cross my desk every day, so I don't always give it the attention it deserves. But I think that's, for us, interesting. I mean, as a museum, we'd like to think we're telling people's experience of war rather than, say, an official line on it. We're not a military museum, we're a social history museum that looks at the impact of war. And so, yes, what somebody has crossed their paths in their working or private lives is as interesting to us as what the official recorder would have done.
A question from the front.
My name is Andrzej Feliks from Polish News Agency. I would like
I'm glad, since this is a Topolski exhibition, we have someone from Poland.
Yes, I would like to ask you to what degree an artist can stamp his own individuality, his own subjective perception, and to what degree these days he relies on modern technology, which seems to be depriving him of the individual means of expression. And the second question would be, has Feliks Topolski left a legacy that is still viable today?
Which I'd like John to answer the first question, and then you may want to answer the question second as well, but I might throw the second to Dan.
Just repeat that. We
need the microphone back. Sorry. He wants him to repeat the question. So. You can do a lot of exercises.
So the media of today doesn't leave room for self-expression. Is that what you're? I'm not sure that that's the case. I wonder why you think that.
Well, is this a question, first of all, to be at the right time, at the right place, to have an interesting material, or is this a question of individual talent, to be able to perceive the reality in an individual light?
I think it's always very much to do with the individual in a certain place at a certain time, and it's that sort of chemistry which if anything, if something works, that it depends on that, the individual and the circumstances, and that doesn't always work. But I imagine that could work in any situation, and as time moves on, people's ways of working changes. It's up to the artists, the individuals, to explore how best they can use whatever medium they have at their disposal to create something that is extraordinary. And therein lies the challenge. So I don't see why that should be any different, just because perhaps circumstances change.
Can I respond partly? I mean, I look at our collection, which is, as I say, we're part of a museum of social history. And I sort of divide it up into sort of 4 quadrants. We have pretty poor art about subjects in the war that maybe weren't particularly important. We have reasonably good quality art about really important subjects. We have really good art about subjects that weren't particularly important. So, and then you've got some great art of a really key event, and it's all there. And it's a sort of a spectrum. So sometimes there's the right artist in the right place with the right skills and is producing great things. And sometimes they were great artists but didn't necessarily find the right subject matter, or it's still interesting painting, but it wouldn't be of a memorable events. So I think I'm sort of in the top quadrant, put my fingers that way. Maybe Henry Moore's shelter drawings from the Second World War, Paul Nash from the First and Second World War. But it's got great paintings, say Stanley Spencer's paintings from the Second World War of shipbuilding, which are fantastic works of art. But shipbuilding was important, but it may be not the first subject you think about for the Second World War. So there's a sort of an element of, he's in the other quadrant over here. Then you've got somebody who happened to be there on D-Day landings, crossing on the ship, and able to do a sketch while they were going over, and how and they're able to do that, I don't know. But it might not be the greatest painting in the world, but it's a hugely important document or record from our point of view. So there's a sort of element of serendipity about how these things worked.
But there's still room for individuality.
Oh, yeah, and very much the ethos of commissioning has always been to find an artist who would be appropriate and would respond to the subject. So John wasn't appointed out of nowhere. He sort of had an interest in conflict zones before, and had been working in that had a sensitivity to those issues. And likewise, a lot of the artists we appoint maybe haven't so specifically been involved in those areas, but we sense would respond to the conflict in particular ways. So go on a bit further. But the artists we sent to Afghanistan, Langlands and Bell, one of the pieces they produced was using gaming technology, computer technology, as a platform on which to build a reconstruction of bin Laden's house that he'd occupied in Afghanistan. And it was this model, and you explored it with a joystick. So he's using a platform which is, in some ways, is very controlling, and it's highly technical and sophisticated, but he's imposed his own, they imposed their own vision or their own artistic ideas onto this piece. Needless to say, as you went around, bin Laden was nowhere to be found, but it was the idea that you could sort of really explore his territory in some strange way.
And would any of you like to address the legacy of Feliks Topolski, which was the second question? Or if not, I'll throw it over to his son.
I'm afraid I didn't feel qualified.
All right. I might ask Dan to answer in a short way. It's okay, we have time. We have time.
I'm not qualified either, really. Because I'm a journalist rather than an art. Sorry, but just looking around at the pictures as we're talking, I'm just thinking, they are great art. I was just thinking about your problems, and I just thought that there's the soldier there sleeping to gain strength until the morning. And just thinking of and just looking at the various images, they are powerful, powerful images. And I think as a historical record, as well as extraordinary draftsmanship, I think there is a great legacy of the way that war was reported during the first half of the last century, which is now not happening, has changed in a way. So I think that's the legacy, is that this is the way that it was presented to people, that there is a conflict at a particular time in the last century.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that particularly something like the Nuremberg trials,
which you have,
we have in our collection. So that's one legacy for us. There's material in public collections, you know, would fit into that category. A hugely important event, and your father and a number of other artists were working there at the time, and a really important record.
I'm going to take a question at the back, if I may.
My name's Gerald Lang. I'm an artist. I was also a soldier for 7 years, 2 of which I spent in Northern Ireland. For the last 4 years I've been engaged in making paintings about the Iraq War. I think at this point in our discussion, if you don't mind me saying so, which has been floundering a bit, we ought to look at the role of the artist throughout history. You can start with the Middle Ages, with the gallant knights in the corner of the manuscript, slaughtering each other, and then you can go on to romanticization like the death of General Wolfe at Quebec, and then you get a little bit of realism with Lady Butler during the Crimean War actually painting the effects of shock in paintings such as the roll call and injury. And then something that's always appealed to me, when photography wasn't quite good enough to carry out its purpose, the illustrations in the Illustrated London News of battle scenes in the First World War on the Somme, explaining what bombing party was like, what trench systems were like, and all that. And then after that, I think photography really did show the shock horror, and it really wasn't the role of the artist to show the shock horror, or to dramatize it, or to romanticize it at all, but to show the linkage between politics and war. And the most important painting, as far as I'm concerned, the most important contribution by an artist ever to this genre is Picasso's Guernica. And before that, we have Otto Dix and the other expressionists during the Weimar Republic, about which we know nothing if it wasn't for them. And then before that, of course, the horrors of war in the peninsula. So I think the artist's role now, it has nothing to do with photography. It has nothing, in particular, it has nothing to do with, dramatizing the thing. It has to do with commenting in a way which will last. Because the great thing about art is that it lasts longer than anything else. We don't know, we know it was Julius was the Pope when Michelangelo was doing the Sistine Chapel scene. We're not clear quite on the politics of between Rome and Siena and Florence and everybody else. What we know is we've got that ceiling by Michelangelo, and that's the sort of the target to which I think we can aspire, and I think that's the contribution we can make to remind people, and not to let people off the hook. People who behave badly. I mean, everybody's, who was in the sort of, the German Air Force in 1937 must have felt a bit uneasy when they looked at Guernica. And I think it's quite interesting. I think I heard this. People can probably confirm it or not, but I believe the tapestry copy of Guernica at the UN was covered up when Colin Powell was delivering his speech about 45 minutes or whatever it was. And that shows you how potent this sort of art can be. Everything else is not significant enough, and it's confusing the roles of rapportage and comment.
From the second, thank you for the ending the floundering. And yes.
My name is Tony Snow. I was a Spitfire pilot in the last World War. I just ask you, what is your view of the Danish cartoons of Muhammad with a bomb in his turban, and that regarding with political correctness? I'd like to know what your view of political correctness is, and whether you think that was politically incorrect, and surely, of course, there's a disturbance among certain religious people.
Well, I think we'll have to refer this to our newspaper photo editor.
I'm only a humble picture editor. I don't think we published them, did we? I don't think anybody did. No, we didn't, did we? But that was decision. I mean, personally, they didn't upset me, and I think we should have probably published them. But I don't make those decisions, and I don't suppose I wanted our building kind of attacked either. I mean, it was just I mean, presumably our management took a sort of a pragmatic approach to it and thought they just didn't want to bring down the world on the Guardian's head, did they? But I mean, being a sort of liberal newspaper, a sort of liberal person myself, the feeling is you should publish anything, shouldn't you? But
in fact, there was a difference between, I was living in Paris at the time, the French press all published it, and the British press, none of them published it.
The French press got into trouble for doing it, didn't they? You know, with their kind of Arab readers.
But the more trouble you get in, I think the better your journalism is.
I think the problem, I don't know. I mean, I think the problem here was no one broke rank. And no one wanted to be the first to break rank either, did they?
In any case,
I think it was a bad. I think it was a bad episode for the British press.
I might go back, if I can, just a little bit to bring it back to the subject at hand, which is visual representation of war. And it seems to me that there are two ways of doing it. One is an artist goes to make art, and the other is he's going to depict what's there journalistically, as Feliks Topolski did, to bear witness, and sometimes that turns out to be art, to be actually great art.
Well, I think the confusion that the chap at the back said is the thing, isn't it? This objectivity and subjectivity, I think I've said this before. There's one other point I was going to say about camera phone pictures and things like that, you know, reader-generated content, I believe it's called, isn't it? I mean, I'm really nervous about this stuff.
But it's free.
Well, I don't worry about that too much. I mean, I'm overspent every month, so I don't, you know, the money kind of doesn't really come into it. But I think I'm really, it's a big problem for us. I mean, the most memorable picture from 7th of July bombing was taken on a camera phone inside that train tunnel, I believe. But that just doesn't give credibility to every single camera phone picture you see. I mean, it's just a huge problem. And I think the Mirror fiasco with, you know, those pictures where Piers Morgan had to resign, I mean, that just sort of points everything up again. But I'm surprised we don't see more camera phone stuff from, you know, the army guys. But what I would be really conscious of is getting, you know, Scotty into trouble as well.
Because you can't be sure of the provenance of these.
Well, you can't be sure of that. You can't be sure whether he's checked out with his CO. You can't be sure of anything really, can you, when something just pops in like that?
No, we've all seen staged video footage in wars and elsewhere, which one has to be very careful about.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the floor? Yes, madam, please. We'll just wait for the microphone.
I'm Elizabeth Block, a writer, so no strong preference between photographers and artists. But I do know that when my photojournalist friends drag me to one of these photo award shows, most of the photos would be harrowing war pictures, perhaps for commercial reasons as discussed. But I'm just pointing out there's nothing comparable in the world of war artists. But I wanted to get back to technology, and I was fascinated by what you said, Mr. Topolski, that your dad was actually able to relay those photos more rapidly. Sorry, his art, his paintings and his drawings more rapidly than photos. Could you tell us a bit about how he did that? Did he just go to Western Union and put down $2.50?
And diplomatic bags, but there were ways of getting stuff back. They weren't immediate. They still took a few days, but they got back faster than photography. And of course, quite soon after that, photography had developed its ways of getting the material back really fast, and that made the immediacy slightly more difficult.
Also, photographs took time to be developed. It wasn't easy to develop them in the field, and there's a famous story of Robert Capa's D-Day pictures. I think 3/4 or more of his rolls of film were actually destroyed in London in a chemical bath that the lab had put the wrong chemicals in. So we'll never know what those pictures were. Who else? Must be someone who hasn't asked a question yet. No? All right. Well, if we can, I think we will probably just wind up. Oh, did you have a question? I thought your hand was up a minute ago. Was it? No. Okay. Do you want to have anything we've left out, any concluding remarks you'd like to make before we go and have a drink?
Well, the only thing I'd say is kind of made me think about art, and perhaps we should commission a war artist. I'm
Not about
quite into it, really.
I mean, you've got to compete. The Guardian needs some help. I think an artist might do the trick.
Yeah,
Or not even just a
it's
war
really
artist,
interesting.
or a street artist. I mean, it doesn't only have to be war.
No, I think it's really interesting thought, really. And I think it's interesting. I think kind of new media has thrown all this stuff open again. Like new media might be the key that opens
old media.
Yeah, in a way, because it's just tearing everything up. So we're trying to tear up all the ways we think about anything. So it might work.
Do you have any concluding thoughts about any of this? You don't have to.
I think it's just a richness, the way that art and people respond in different ways, and creativity moves as the technology moves. People move with it and readapt and make their statements. And picking up on what Joe Lang says, that need to comment and to try and make a statement that is going to last beyond the day that the newspaper's life, I think, is still the challenge. And there's sort of there's that moral urge to work in that way and to respond in those ways, which is vital to how we understand the world, how we see it, how we shape it.
And John, final word to the artist.
Well, I mean, I can only speak for myself, in that what motivates me, I suppose, in a nutshell, to do what I do is trying to figure out what it is that makes people want to kill one another and how they justify that politically. And so long as that goes on, I suppose I will continue to be obsessed and abhorred by it. And my way of dealing with that is by producing work. It doesn't always mean that I'm going somewhere to visit the scene of a conflict. It doesn't have to be that. I mean, some of the...
Well, Picasso never went to Guernica, for example.
Quite, yes. I mean, some of the recent work... I mean, I use the internet a lot these days. I did a whole series of paintings about Guantanamo based on low-resolution images of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, for instance. That doesn't mean I won't continue to visit places, and I went to Angola last year. But I will just continue working. I mean, I suppose a good point is whether there are people like me who do try and address these issues, who continue to work, is whether the media pay any attention to it, which is quite a good question, or whether what you are covering and what's going on in art, which tends to be focused around a fairly small coterie, and doesn't broaden out to people who are perhaps addressing these issues. So I think perhaps the media have something to that they could take on board.
I think art is kind of fashionable, isn't it? That's the problem.
Yes.
Which is...
Well, that's another topic.
I think you said it.
Well, yeah.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I hope you'll have a chance to see all of the Feliks Topolski drawings, which are beautiful. This exhibition is tied to an effort to preserve Feliks's 600-foot-long memoir of the century, which is a beautiful possession of the nation, which the nation has not taken very good care of, and which requires a lot of money to restore so that it can be put back on exhibition under Hungerford Bridge, where he painted them. And it's all to do with that. And if anybody has the urge to help that campaign, please tell Daniel. And otherwise, come and have a drink and take a look at these beautiful drawings. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming.